On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, we've got bottlenecks along the coast. Our Christmas holiday may be in jeopardy, but most importantly of all, we may be up a river without a barge. All on this episode of What's Going On with Shipping. Hi, I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. I'm an associate professor of history and the chair of the History, Criminal Justice, and Political Science Department at Campbell University in beautiful North Carolina, former merchant mariner, and an adjunct instructor in maritime industry policy at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. So I have not been taken out to the woodshed yet by the NTSB yet for my report on the Golden Ray, or by the port of LA and Long Beach for my reports on the congestion in the ports. I will add this. I want to thank everybody out there for watching this, sharing this. I got to say, one of the things I love about social media, I really do, is you can bring together experts. I know social media can be a terrible place at times, but I got to say, I have some great followers on my Twitter feed, Facebook, and a few other venues. And, you know, when I throw stuff out there, listen, I am not perfect. I'm not right all the time. First thing I learned when I get myself really educated was the fact that the more education you get, the more you realize how little and narrow parameters of things you know. My goal in this entire endeavor, and again, thank everybody for subscribing, is to share the knowledge of the maritime industry with everybody in general. And at times, yeah, I'm going to be addressing experts, and at other times I'm addressing the general public. And I appreciate all the feedback. Some people will come back in really hard and fast and slam me down hard, and that's fine. That's if that's what you want to do. That's great. Go ahead. Other people are really appreciative, and I really like when they come in and highlight things that maybe I either missed, got wrong, because I do get things wrong. But I got to say, a lot of great ideas about things we should be thinking about doing for relieving the backlog on the West Coast. But that's not what this episode is about. This episode today is about something completely different, and that's the inland waterway system of the United States. We've been focusing on trans-Pacific, transatlantic trade, but one of the things that is really important to understand is that the United States has a massive inland water system. And I got to say, it has quite a bit of an inland water system. So when you go to my favorite marine traffic, you'll see the inland waterway system of the United States. That's the Mississippi River right there. Here's the Ohio down to the Cumberland and the Tennessee River, up to the Red River, the Missouri River, and of course the Great Lakes. Massive inland waterway system that we have, and utterly important for the transportation of goods, particularly grain, agricultural material, and ore coming out of the central region. If you think about it, from the Rockies to the Appalachian Mountains, this is a huge basin. If you ever look at a topographical map of the United States and you look at water flows, the Mississippi Basin is tremendous. Plus, it's connected to the Great Lakes. So really the eastern part of the United States is a huge island. And the movement of tugs and barges are really essential. But what we've seen here is a series of stories that indicate that there's issues with this inland water trade. And this has been simmering for quite a while yet. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these. So this is from Workboat, goes back to end of August after Hurricane Ida came through, disrupts lower Mississippi barge traffic. Now, we already had a disruption on the Mississippi River prior to this. That was the fracture of the I-40 bridge in Memphis. When that bridge closed, we had a couple of days delay there. Now, understand the Mississippi River is really dependent on, obviously, rains, depending on the height of the river. And the river, it has to have a certain height. And understand, too much water is as bad as too little water. Too little water, you don't have the draft to move tugs and barges up and down the Mississippi. Too much water restricts your air draft under bridges. So you've got to be in the Goldilocks. You got to be in the sweet spot there. Not too much, not too little. Got to be in the sweet spot. In the lower Mississippi, Hurricane Ida disrupted everything, flooded the lower Mississippi, flooded Louisiana, pushed boats everywhere, and particularly barges. A lot of barges have been displaced. One of the key elements of U.S. maritime policy, something called the Jones Act, the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, and one section of that is Section 27, which provides cabotage, basically within the confines of the United States, inland waterways. In particularly, you have to be U.S. built, U.S. flagged, U.S. owned, and U.S. operated. And so this is the purview of American shipping companies. And lots of times, nemesis, I don't know if any of you have arch enemies out there. I do. I have people who just don't like me, and I don't understand why, because it has to do with an issue of the Jones Act. I oppose the concept of just repealing it, and that gets people mad at me to the point that they are very, very nasty, and I don't understand why. I'm a lovable person. But anyway, This inland waterway system is essential. Tugs and barges are the way you move things on the inland waterway system. Imagine tugs as big containers, open top containers. That's exactly the system that's used. Matter of fact, the container system is modeled on the tug and barge system. There was actually vessels that had been built to carry loaded barges on board, what were called lash, lighter aboard ship, and then CBs, sea barges, carry these big barges. Didn't work very well because of the number of barges you needed, but containerization really became the norm. But in the inland water system, we need these barges. And so what we're seeing here is a series of stories. So, for example, this one here by ICIS, barge traffic on lower Mississippi River could be delayed well into September amid damages to Ida. And this story in particular is talking about an issue in the delivery of key fertilizer right here. Major carrier American Commercial Barge Line says working with the Coast Guard and local authorities to assess the situation. And one of the issues you have here, and I'll come back up here a little bit. Some chemicals shipped by barge in Mississippi are likely to be delayed following damage. And this is key fertilizers they talk about here, about ethyl glycols from the U.S. Gulf to the Midwest are delayed as a result of river closures. This could be manufacturing. This could be fertilizer, a huge amount of material that's not being moved by barge. Barges move amazing amounts. I mean, we're talking about thousands of tons of cargo, much more than a simple truck or even a train can do. And the inland waterway system is key for that. This story here from the Progressive Farmer. Ida expected to shift grain export flow. Again, got a great map in here if you ever want to see what exactly the lower Mississippi looks like, where the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers controls it. The Army Corps, which got a lot of attention, obviously, during Hurricane Katrina back in 2005, is the agency delegated to control basically the American waterways internal. And obviously, they created a series of levees and waterways to channel the Mississippi. The Mississippi does not like that, and water doesn't like to be channeled, doesn't like to be controlled, likes to go where it wants to go. But one of the things you see in this story right here, and I'll read the intro here, grain companies with terminals along the lower Mississippi are looking for shifting more of their committed grain and soybean exports to ports in the Pacific Northwest. This is why we're seeing lines off Tacoma and Portland right now with bulkers, while damage assessments and repairs begin in earnest following Hurricane Ida. So we had several issues down here, and not the least of which is power lines down to a lot of the grain elevators and facilities down here to load without power. And I'm not talking about minor power lines. I'm talking about the power line goes to your house. I'm talking about big, huge transmission cables are down. And they're still working on that to get that up. This story was from, I think it was early September, this one. So the situation has obviously changed now. Most power is coming back up online September 2nd. So obviously 2 weeks ago, most power is back up and running, but it's still going to cause problems. Go to this story from GCAP. Then this is also from early September right here, September 4th. U.S. grain exports remain crippled by Ida as critical harvest near. So you got a twofold issue here. Number one, because of the flooding, because of the winds, because of the rains, barges were displaced all up and down the Mississippi. Parts of the Mississippi River were closed. That means barges aren't moving. They're not bringing grain down to the loading facilities. Ships can't get up the Mississippi because of closures in the Mississippi. And then even if they can get to the facilities to load, the power was out for a week or two. And this is having a cascade effect, things we've seen happen before, but now we're seeing it happen on the inland water side. That is the top of a bulker. If you imagine a huge, massive tanker, these guys are standing on top of, I'm going to say, probably close to a 14-story high building of grain of probably with a corn or a soybean, whatever that happens to be right there. Wheat, not sure exactly what they're on. Soybean, they're loading soybeans right there. So that's how high they're standing on that. That gives you an idea of the amount of material that goes in there. One of the most dangerous ships in the world to load is a bulker like this, loading soybean. Believe it or not, the most dangerous commodity to load is this, because when you load it, there's a fine dust that comes up, which is extremely explosive. If a little bit of flame gets into it, it ignites. I've been a volunteer firefighter, just came back from it. That's why I'm dressed like this. Been doing it for 20 years. The closest I ever got to being burned at a fire was a sawdust explosion. And this is exactly what you're talking about here. Those power outages mean the platforms to convey that grain out into the ships isn't running. And that's the issue that had been slowing everything up. Same thing here. No story I want to talk about, with about 50 bulk ships waiting to load along the lower Mississippi. And that's September 10th. Now, understand, once you cause that delay, once you have that delay in that backlog, they're going to come in very quick. Once the power's back on, they can load. They're going to start loading, and you load really quick. I mean, it's just a conveyor dumping soybean, wheat, grain, whatever it is in there. It's quick. And what they're counting on is tugs and barges coming down the Mississippi, bringing that. Well, you can't bring more than the facilities can hold. You can't bring more if you don't have tugs and barges. You can't bring more if the river's closed because of flooding and incidents and obstructions on the river. So the flow of material heading to the lower Mississippi to load bulkers is been disrupted. Go on here. This is the advocate from Baton Rouge talking about how Hurricane Ida threw the barge industry into a tizzy along it. You can see right there with kind of just the flooding and debris right there, all the issues associated with it. This is a temporary bridge right here going across because of bridges being swamped and under. They're doing temporary things, closing parts of rivers, and that means barges and material are just trapped. See right here, there are many barges that aren't able to load or unload, just as we are beginning to kick off a really good harvest in the United States. This is from Deb Calhoun, the Senior Vice President of the Waterways Council. I know there's frustration about it. Everybody's working as hard as they can to bring things back fully online. And you see right here, they're talking about an economic loss of up to $295 million in the port of New Orleans as the river was closed for several days. This would amount to more than $1 billion of lost economic activity in Louisiana. So it's having a detrimental effect. This story from Yahoo News goes a little bit further here. U.S. barge costs spike weeks after hurricane terminal under repair. Barge freight costs. We've been talking about containers and the escalating cost of containers. We've been talking about the escalating cost to charter container ships. Well, barges are following the same thing. Barge freight costs for moving grains in the Midwestern United States spiked on Thursday due to ongoing logistical problems more than 2 weeks after Hurricane Ida. Come down here a little further because of the story. Global grain trader Cargill reopened its Wesco, Louisiana grain terminal export this week, while rival exporters Lewis Dreyfus and Archer Daniel Midlands have been loading export shipments for several days. So we're up and running. We're loading cargo, but now we need cargo to get down there. As grain handlers scramble to resume operations at the Gulf, China this week booked 4 to 6 bulk cargoes of Brazilian soybeans for shipment in October and November during the peak of U.S. export period. So a lot of this grain is going to China. And China has a voracious appetite for food. China has only 8% arable land. They're the size of the United States, but they have a population that's 4 times as big as the United States. They need food coming in. And one of those big alternative sources is down in South America, Brazil, Argentina, that area right there. China is trying to diversify itself from where it gets its imports. It doesn't want to become overly concentrated on any one area. So, for example, there's a big story about meat exports out of San Francisco right now in Oakland increasing. That's because Australian beef, there's a big fight going on between Australia and China. So the amount of Australian beef going to China has decreased tremendously, and that's being replaced by American beef coming in, which creates another huge problem. And speaking of Australia, working on a video right now talking about the implications of the Australian, U.S., British nuclear submarine deal. I know we do commercial here, but that has commercial implications, and we'll explain it in that video. So keep an eye out for it. Going to try to get it in this week if I can, but I'm heading off on a conference soon. So I'm trying to get everything in before I leave. Ads down here, adding urgency. Crops are maturing earlier than normal in key states such as Minnesota, Iowa, and Illinois. Minnesota, number 4 corn producer. The corn harvest was 3% complete by September 12th. 34% was mature compared to the state's 5-year average of 20%. So if the crops are coming in early, you've got to get them out. And if you can't get them out, that's a huge problem. Go here to the next story from G Captain. Southern Louisiana ports recover. However, they request federal aid for Hurricane Ida recovery. There's a lot of damage in ports down in Southern Louisiana. You've got disruptions. Barges, as I said before, have been thrown about and damaged. They need to be repaired. Tugs have been damaged. You have facilities that were underwater, need to be rebuilt. Piers, when a pier goes underwater, you basically could wash out the pilings, need to be resurveyed. There is a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done. And again, looking for that federal aid to do it. This is why investment in infrastructure, particularly in ports, is so important. We need to be investing in these ports all the time. They generate revenue. Ports generate revenue. Infrastructure generates revenue. It's the best thing to invest in if you're government. Don't build the bridge to nowhere. It doesn't benefit anyone. You're just building something to, cut a ribbon on. But when you invest in things like ports and infrastructure, it's great. We had a discussion on one of my last videos. We did a discussion about the airfield at Alameda, and what if Oakland had developed that, they'd be able to do it. A lot of people pointed to the fact that Oakland's only working 5 days a week. They're not working 24/7. There's that big push to get LA to go 24/7. They're working 7 days a week, but they're only working 16 hours. And I made the statement about let's get Oakland up and running. And of course, it's not as easy as that. I did make it sound way too simple, and it's not. You can't just shift a ship. There's a lot of logistics that goes into it, a lot of obviously work that goes into it. However, you can start planning for that. You can start getting ships loaded to go to Oakland. You can start modifying plans. You can start modifying shipment plans to make more use of Oakland than we're doing now. Maybe not for the ships that are off LA Long Beach right now, but in the future. And we need to be thinking about infrastructure now, because the time to get funding for infrastructure is when infrastructure is under pressure. When it's not under pressure, no one's going to fund this stuff because nobody cares, because everything's working fine. Why are we funding this? Everything's fine. Now's the time you got to push it. Anyway, my little soapbox for the day. I apologize. Last story on our barges. This is the one that really caught my eye, and obviously the one that really kicked off today's story. No empty barges cripples U.S. fertilizer supply. This is a story from 2 days ago. This is a Bloomberg story that came out. Hurricane Ida struck the heart of the U.S. fertilizer industry, and now Storm Nicholas, tropical storm should be, Nicholas threatens even more damage in the Gulf. It goes on here. Prices for major fertilizers soared after Ida blew through New Orleans, shutting down plants, causing logistics nightmares for companies trying to ship products. A farm chemical known as diamond phosphate, or DAP, climbed to the highest since 2008. Diammonium phosphate. My science majors out here will get on me for this. It's also it's nitrogen based. Expensive fertilizer adds to the cost of producing food at a time when farmers already see margins stretched thin. With everything from equipment and labor to seeds getting pricier, the hikes for the chemicals which farmers use to ensure abundant crops could exacerbate global food inflation. So, shortage of barges. Again, there's a finite number of barges, and people are not investing in this. Again, barge and tug industry is a thin margin industry, not a huge amount of money. Absolutely essential, needs to be done, need to invest in these things. We need to make these things more profitable and more attractive. Because they're so essential to the U.S. economy. If we don't have food to eat. Obviously, it's a big thing, but we don't have food to export. It's a huge export. We get a lot of revenue generated from this. And without this, with this shortage of barges, then it's very hard to move up. In many ways, what we see with containers coming across the Atlantic and the Pacific, and then on chassis, on trains across, that's what tugs and barges do. Understand, the inland waterway system was the modern highway system before we created the railroads, before we created highways. That's what we used. Now, the U.S. is in a very different situation. You'll hear people talk about the fact that we need to develop this more. Well, the problem is we have the Rocky Mountains here. We've got this huge, massive barrier that cuts 1/3 of the, basically one half of the country off from the other half of the country. You can't get there very easily around there. You got to go through the Panama Canal, which is not an easy transit. It costs money. But for the interior here, the food belt of the United States, the Great Plains, all the way from the Dakotas down to Oklahoma and then across into the Midwest. Man, this is the way you move everything, is on these tugs and barges. It's the way. It hasn't changed much from flatboats of Mark Twain era to what we have today. And tugs and barges are expensive. New tugs are expensive. Barges are expensive. They're very difficult. It is a unique mariner who crews those. My hat's off to them. It's a really tough thing to do. They do amazing things. If you've never seen a loaded tug and barge maneuvering down the Mississippi, it's a sight to behold. But this is absolutely essential to the U.S. economy. And again, our fixation is on LA Long Beach, the containers, and the shortages we're going to see right now coming up into the Halloween and Black Friday and Christmas season. but just as essential, the inland waterways. And so thought I'd shine some light on that today for everybody. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe to the channel. Amazing subscriptions over the past couple of days. I mean, I got over 200 subscriptions the past few days, over 9,000. My goal was 10,000 by the end of the year, and I'm optimistic now. But I shouldn't be optimistic because I know what happens. Fickle group we all are. We have different tastes. But if you like it, please subscribe, hit the bell to be alerted about new videos when they come out. Share it across social media so other people will know about it. Give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment. I try to answer as many comments as I can and get some feedback. I enjoy my feedback when I get it. And if there's other topics or interests you have, every now and then I'll get a person who sends something. Hey, Sal, can you do something about that? If I got time and I can do it, I'm happy to do it. So this is Sal signing off.